So thank you everybody for coming out to the Silicon Valley Deep Learning Group. This is our largest event ever. This is also our 1-year anniversary since our first talk by Stephen Balaban at Mixed Tile Labs back in September 2015. And in that time, the group has grown to 2,500 members. And lots of new friends have been made, some new companies have been formed, new connections of every kind in the group. And it's been a really positive experience for all of us, for the people running it, and for as many of the folks coming. So we really want to thank you all for your investment in the group. You've really made it a wonderful thing. Of course, this wouldn't have been possible without our volunteers, and more have joined to help us out along the way, and now they're co-organizers as well. And I want to single out 2 particular individuals for special thanks, those being Chris Chianci and Rebecca Coleman, for their exceptional help on this and many other events. So if we could just give them again. So this event would not have been possible without our sponsors. So I'd like to also thank our sponsors, and I'd like to thank Wipro, I'd like to thank Clary.ai, and of course, I'd like to thank tonight's special sponsor, which is Royse Law. So we'll hear more about them in a moment. Okay, so you didn't come here to listen to me talk. So I'd like to introduce you first to our moderator for tonight's event. The moderator is Roger Royse. In addition to being a fine gentleman, Roger is the founder and executive partner of Royse Law, and we are honored to have him here with us. He's going to introduce our panel and take charge for the rest of the evening. So without further ado, Roger Royse.
Okay, thanks very much. First, a word from our sponsor. So I'm Roger Royse. I'm the founder of the Royse Law Firm. Can everybody hear me, or do I need this mic? I need the mic. So we're a business, corporate, and tax firm with offices here in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. We're a full-service firm. We do everything for startup companies. It's all technology startups, financings, formations, M&A, and as of a couple weeks ago, we now also do patent work. Is Steve here? Raise your hand, Steve. Right. There he is. There's the head of our patent department. We have an entire patent group now. So pretty much everything you need as a startup company. We're a one-stop shop. So I'm really happy to be here tonight and really glad to have the opportunity to work with this deep learning group and put this panel together. I understand that this is the first investment in deep learning panel we've had, and I always love moderating because I learn so much. It's like having the best seat in the house. So what we're going to do here tonight is I'm going to briefly introduce the panelists, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to tell you a little bit about who they are, how they come to the area, what they look for, and we're going to go into a discussion that I will lead. If you have questions, hold your questions. We'll have a Q&A section here. You know, I'm probably more interested to hear your questions than you already hear mine, so don't be shy about that. But we do want to set this up as an introductory matter first. So, Rebecca, are you going to say anything, or should I just launch right into it? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before Roger introduces the panelists to you, I'd love to introduce you to our panelists. So, just a very quick show of hands, take a bit of a temperature of the room, wondering who out there is a co-founder perhaps of a deep learning or AI startup. If you could raise your hands up high. Thank you. All right, that's a pretty decent amount of you sprinkled around. And then anyone out there who is an AI or deep learning practitioner, technologist, who'd consider themselves novice or otherwise. Great, we should have some really good questions later on from all of you. And then how about anyone who's a bit of a beginner, just looking curious and getting exposure to this area, to getting started? Beautiful, welcome. And then last but not least, are there any investors in the audience who aren't too shy to raise their hands? Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you all for being here. And I'll pass the baton on to our panelists and Roger.
Well, while you're doing that, let me introduce the panel. So closest to me is Umair Akeel. He's the operating partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, BVP, right down the street from us. He was previously at Oracle, and he focuses on SaaS, enterprise mobile, as well as building out the future investment roadmap for big data and developer tools. Leonard, is it Speiser? Speiser. Leonard Speiser is the founder of Neuron.VC. Is also with a company named Clover, and he not only is an investor, but he sold his previous company, Clover, to First Data, KKR, and also has a degree from MIT. Bill Reichert, very frequent panelist on investment panels throughout the Valley on a wide variety of topics. Everybody knows Bill from Garage.com. Entrepreneur, venture capitalist, mentor, author, speaker, board member, advisor, educator, partner, etc. And finally, on the end is Venu Pemmaraju. He's co-head and vice president of Wipro Ventures, previously at Intel Capital, Synopsys, and Mentor Graphics. From the University of Chicago. I didn't know that. And he currently manages some big data, cloud-based companies, and artificial intelligence. So I think we've got a panel with some very deep domain expertise. You people do have a microphone, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I'm going to let you, why don't you just take a couple of minutes, each of you, and just, add a little color to what I've said and tell us who you are and how you come to the area of deep learning.
So I'll start. Umair Akeel. I'm an engineer by background turned investor after Oracle acquired our startup back in 2015. Spent some time with them. And then as part of that acquisition, we looked at data. We were doing Marketing Cloud at Oracle, and the volumes of data for Marketing Cloud were just too much for queries to handle. So that's how I got into the space of machine learning originally. This year it's all called deep learning. So now deep learning, if you guys change it to intelligence next year, we'll call it intelligence. So keeping up with the trends on naming and involved in that way.
Great. Leonard Speiser. I got involved in deep learning because of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Oh, that wasn't clear. There was an MIT professor that would teach programming by having the students explain how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and he would bring in a loaf of bread, peanut butter and jelly, and he'd ask the students, what's the first instruction? What should I do to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich? And the student raises their hand and says, put the peanut butter on the bread. He takes the jar of peanut butter, he puts it on the loaf of bread, and the student's like, no. And he's like, well, that's how programming works. You have to give it very explicit instructions, and if you do not give it the exact instructions, you will not get your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Programming is essentially if-then statements, and you have to be very precise, and if your inputs are anything different, if all of a sudden you have a Dutch crunch roll instead of wheat bread, your program's going to fail. And as I started to learn more about deep learning and realized that you would build a peanut butter jelly sandwich a very different way, you would actually just show it millions and billions of pictures of peanut butter jelly sandwiches, and you would have the program look at those peanut butter jelly sandwiches and understand exactly what makes a perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then someday I would have a machine that no matter what I gave it, peanut butter, no jelly, jam, chunky peanut butter, open-faced peanut butter jelly sandwich, this machine could make me the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I said, this is a world I want to live in. And that is how I got into deep learning.
So the question is, what year will it be when Leonard actually gets a decent peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Good question.
And it ain't anytime soon, which is so to why I'm here on this panel, which is I'm incredibly pissed off that, I don't know what year that was, but I had roughly the same story, when I was a kid in college, which was, how would you program, except the story that I got was, how do you tell a computer to change a baby's diaper? That was the,
Nice.
So that was the, right? And so that's an even more painful.
Do not want to make that mistake.
Right.
You're waiting longer for yours.
It's an even more painful programming task, right? So, and that was decades ago that we had this conversation. And I invested in an AI technology company back in the late 80s, which was the most brilliant, eye-watering, AI technology company I could imagine. And unfortunately, it didn't make it. Damn it. But in any case, so I have been thrashing this topic for many, many years, and continue to thrash it. And so we have invested. We have not invested in any pure play AI technology companies. We have invested in a machine vision technology company and a robotics company that is using AI broadly defined. We'll see how it plays out. I'm tremendously agitated by this topic.
So I don't have that good stories. So Venu Pemmaraju, I co-lead Wipro Ventures. So we are a strategic investment arm of Wipro, global engineering and consulting and services company. So my journey here is very simple like yours. I was investing in many areas of enterprise software, and I think deep learning is now becoming an ingredient that you should be aware of, and it'll become part of pretty much most solutions going forward. So it's a very mundane reason why I'm here. I'm here to tell you about, hopefully, something about what I look for in investments and go from there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, let's just get to the heart of the matter. I mean, people here want your money. So I get the impression that deep learning companies, and I know we have a lot of startups out here, I get the impression has a lot of technology risk, and that there's a long ramp and there's a lot of R&D involved. And I know that's not something that investors like, but are you guys willing, both financial investors and strategic investors, are you willing to invest in a company that's going to have to do an awful lot of R&D? Will you invest in an R&D project, and what will it take to get you to take a good, strong, hard look at a company that doesn't really have a lot of traction? And I don't know, Bill, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we do not like R&D companies. And so the companies we've invested in have been able to demonstrate that the technology works today to solve pretty narrowly and tightly defined problems. So, so there are lots of problems that AI or, machine learning, and now at some point, I don't know if somebody wants to draw the line between deep learning and the rest of AI, and maybe somebody should do that. But we don't draw that line sharply, because what we're looking for are novel solutions that are defensible at the stage where they are commercializable, as opposed to at the R&D stage or at the hype curve stage. So we're kind of trying to find that, niche opportunity where that we know that it works, and the question is really more of the market question, not the technology question. The roadmap in all these companies, though, you have the roadmap discussion, right? And so the roadmap discussion is, what will we be able to do over the next few years as the technology progresses? And so, we buy into those visions, because we're enthusiasts and we're investors, and that's our job, right? So, but we don't invest in science projects or R&D projects.
Venu, from a strategic standpoint, investor standpoint, similar idea, you want to see that it works before you put money in it?
We do. If you look at what Wipro does, our strengths are really touching the global 1,000 customers, the enterprise customers. So typically when we are working with them, they are looking at, in some senses, proven solutions. But at the same time, the nature of working with startups is that you are getting so-called semi-proven solutions or whatever. So to Bill's point, are we investing in projects? We're not investing in projects, but what we are looking for is at least those companies or those startups that have had at least some level of traction, whether it is 5 customers or 10 customers, that's something to be decided, for that company. But in general, what we want is some level of technology risk that has been taken out of the system. And what we are good at is scaling it and going on a global level. So when you are at that stage, you don't want to have the technology risk, because the last thing a customer wants is to look at Wipro and say that you deployed a solution which did not work, or the company whose solution you deployed is not there anymore. So we have to be a little bit risk averse, both in terms of the technology and the viability of the company. So we have to look at both. And for that reason, I think we look at primarily Series B-ish type of companies rather than your classic seed or the Series A type of companies.
Anything to that from Bessemer's standpoint?
No, I think science projects have a place. Academics is really where it's at. Academia has been very good at solving these problems. We do some seed investments, but it has to be outside of the pure R&D space. If you even have one customer, that might make sense for some seed investments, but again, we wouldn't lead the seed round, we'd be part of the money in. Generally prefer to wait for a Series A till you have some commercial traction. And we can take some level of risk as long as there's a clearly defined market for what you're trying to build. So you can take a little bit of market risk, you can take a little bit of technology risk. But if a science project is just a science project, then it's not really a fit for us.
Now, you used a really scary word just now, traction. Does that mean revenue?
No. So I mean,
Okay.
look, we've funded companies which are pre-revenue, we've sold companies which are pre-revenue, so we've exited out of them before revenue came in. For me, at least when I'm looking at it, traction means an inkling of a product market fit where a customer can find some value in what you're doing. Whether they're paying you or not is a separate matter. In the B2B space, a lot of time that could mean just getting POC dollars or getting NRE, not particularly getting revenue from it, but some defensible explanation that says, if your deep learning is just an algorithm, right? So if you're selling it to car manufacturers or old industries, traction could simply mean an executive from one of those companies is sponsoring a POC for you. Anything that basically shows there is a market for this. It can be very small, but something.
Okay. Let's back up a little and talk a little bit about the technology itself. Bill, you mentioned where do we draw those lines? And so I got to tell you, I was at an event, I was out at a VC's place last week, and I come walking in, and there are about 20 people sitting in the lobby, and they're all Google people. And they're all sitting around talking, and I said, what are you guys talking about? And I said, well, we're talking about deep learning. And I said, uh-oh. I said, this sounds bad. If Google is getting into this business, and if they're launching products utilizing this technology, that's an awfully hard thing to compete with. And I got to tell you, if I had a nickel for every startup company I've seen over the last many years that said they were going to kick Google's ass, I'd have a lot of nickels. If I had a nickel for everyone it actually did, I wouldn't have any nickels. So tell me, does that bother you a little bit? Or two things. Number one, is it a wise thing to go up against a gorilla like that in the space that they indeed are getting into it? And secondly, what are the applications, where are the opportunities where people can get into this market and do something big, given that the big boys are doing this as well? Anybody want?
Oh, well,
Sounds like
I'll jump in. So I remember when I did my first startup out at MIT was, it's now called instant messaging, but we didn't have a name for it back then, and everyone told me don't do it. Microsoft crushes everyone. Microsoft beats everyone. And sooner or later, Microsoft's still big out there, but they didn't continue to crush everyone forever. I think the question you have to ask yourself is, are you going into what their core business is and what they're good at, where they have an advantage over you, or are you just going into something that they could go into? I don't think Google makes a ton of cash off of deep learning today. They can make a lot off of advertising and off of the original search engine, but I do think that what you probably need to figure out is anything where their channel gives them a massive advantage over yours, then you need to think about it. In the case of instant messaging, the internet had come out, so there was a new channel for distributing software, so it didn't matter that much in the way it used to. In the case of Google, if you're going to build an app that lets people take pictures and identify who their friends are in their pictures, you probably aren't in a great position from a channel perspective to go up against Facebook or Google and so forth. But if you're building something that doesn't really matter what their channel is, if you're going up and you're finding someone's, who's got the Fortune 500 connections and you're able to get a channel, you're able to get distribution, build that build that product. Don't worry about it, Google, or anyone else that people tell you to worry about. So I don't really get that scared at the Googles and Facebooks of the world. You have a bigger issue of just the fact that it's really hard to build a team and hire people because they seem to be hiring literally anyone who puts AI or deep learning on their resume right now. So.
Can I add to that one? I mean, if you look at it in a different stages, whether it is the 80s or the 90s or whatever, there's always one company that everybody will point to, or a few companies, and say, how can you go up against that company, right? I mean, it's today, people may be pointing at Google or whatever. So I'm sure when somebody was doing a microprocessor company in the 70s or 80s, they probably pointed to, an Intel or somebody like that. So I think for every area, there is some very large company out there that you will, people will say that how can you go up against them? But I think you have to find niches for yourselves, and you have to solve something that customers really care about. So I think that's how probably entrepreneurs think about it, rather than, am I competing against, a large corporation, whether it is Google or Facebook or anybody else like that.
I want to add to that. Going back to that traction thing, what is deep learning? Nobody draws the line, but I mean, deep learning is a word basically used to explain neural networks. They've been around for a long time. But any value you're going to extract from this technology depends on one thing and one thing only: data, access to data. And you pointed to one of them, photos. If you're going to go and do something on top of people's private pictures, Facebook, Google, and Apple have a lot of that data. How are you going to get it? If you can find a way to get access to data, a proprietary source, a non-proprietary source, some viral way where you can get access to data, you can build something where they're not looking at applying their deep learning functionality. Google did make money on it, but it made money by saving their electricity bill. Right? Like, even they kind of went at it a different way. They saved their power bill by using deep learning. So data becomes the real angle here. How are you going to get access to the very large volumes of data that you can train your systems with? And the funny thing is, if you have enough data, it doesn't matter if you're using deep networks or you're using traditional machine learning techniques. Your algorithms will still probably work. So find the data, what the problems. Some problem sets will work which have statistical qualities. Okay, I see a few people nodding that deep learning is not identical. If you have enough data, the algorithms aren't the number one problem. Getting access to data is your bigger problem. Algorithms, we can always keep finding and tuning.
So just to, throw a hand grenade out on the topic. So actually, before I do, is anybody here work for Google? Okay, all right. So
Any of you lying?
That's
no, I mean,
literally not possible, guys. Which one of you?
Somebody's lying, right? But it is, it's, I mean, this is not the core of your question, but at the core of your question, you think about it, Google has been spectacularly unsuccessful at commercializing almost anything they've come up with. I mean, anybody here got a Google phone? Anybody here got a Google computer? Anybody here? Oh, you got a Google? Really? Good for you. All right. And you don't. That's the guy who works and you don't work for Google. Really? You used to work for Google. So no, that was not. That's a side note. But I mean, as Umair is saying, the cool thing about the world today for both entrepreneurs and investors is that almost everything is open to innovation, disruption, and some form of attack by artificial intelligence. I mean, it's hard to think of a sector that is not subject to the possibility of doing something amazing if you apply some of these new algorithmic technologies. And so, you're talking about you need the data, but data is everywhere and infinite. I mean, just as an example of an amazingly cool company that I'm not worried that Google's going to go after, or Apple, or Facebook, is a company. Callie's not in the room. Are you, Callie? No. Okay. So I'm going to bastardize the story. But basically, what they're using is deep learning to identify patterns in audio files, where those audio files are collected from stethoscopic listening to your chest, to your lungs, and to your heart. So there's a lot of information in the sounds coming from your chest. And doctors are notoriously terrible at hearing those sounds well. And machines can hear them and learn from them and diagnose. I mean, it's an unbelievably brilliant and cool corner of the universe where deep learning and technology can dramatically change, an important part of all of our lives. You think about education, right? We haven't done anything interesting in education in like forever. I mean, the last interesting thing we did in education was adaptive learning. And that was invented really about 50 years ago. And since then we've been able to do video on the internet, yay, right? But it's unbelievable how bad we've been at transforming education given all this technology that we have. Now, can we use artificial intelligence to enable a machine to truly be a teacher coach to a student? We still can't do that right now. But ideally, we can get the machines to the level where machines can be tutors. Right now, we need people to be tutors as good as machines are. All they are is a window into a vast amount of information, largely speaking. But we haven't scratched the surface of what we could do with education. Google should someday care. Maybe they will. I mean, maybe Apple will. But, and maybe Microsoft will, but there's so much that we could do that we haven't touched yet. So, I'm sorry.
Well, let's follow up on that. This is an investment in deep learning. So one of my personality flaws, as you know, is I do a lot of work with the agricultural industry, and I created a group around ag tech, which, by the way, think about it, it's a huge deep learning application. There are satellites up there and drones and robots, talk about data. But one of the things I found that I thought was really interesting, the first thing I found is that there were a lot of really smart people here in Silicon Valley coming up with the neatest, coolest, whiz-bang stuff you ever saw that no farmer in the world would ever buy. And I think from an investor standpoint, as opposed from the inventor, you're probably more concerned about what has a real good commercial application, right? You gave me one just now, the medical one. What are some other really good places where some of the smart people in this room can put their energy and talent if they want to do something that's commercially viable? Any other suggestions?
Mm-hmm. So actually the areas that we are looking at, applications are probably more industrial. So for example, looking at pipelines and figuring out corrosion, looking at wind turbines, looking at image analysis of those to figure out whether they need to be replaced, are there hairline cracks in it that are not visible. So there are industrial applications, and you mentioned about farming insurance. So there are areas where a lot of activity is going on, but it doesn't mean that there are solutions that are available. And I think part of it is also that I think the burden of proof on deep learning solutions is higher than on what we place on individuals actually. So I think, Bill, you just mentioned that, doctors are terrible at listening to whatever, but we still go to a doctor and we still rely on that particular doctor's advice, right?
As good as it gets.
But if you had a deep learning solution that did that, I'm sure you would probably look at false positives and false negatives much more carefully than you would in evaluating a doctor. Mm-hmm. So I think you will face that. I think we will have a higher level of acceptance for deep learning automated solutions than if a human were conducting it, because for some reason we think the human is an expert. So that said, I think we do look at a lot of solutions in place. I mean, that some developed by Wipro, some third-party solutions, but I don't think we have reached a point where we are comfortable deploying it and letting it run. Not there yet.
I would throw in, so I do love the industrial use cases and made some investments there, and I love the medical, made investment there as well. But the theme I've been starting to gravitate more and more towards is what's something that deep learning can do really well that traditional computer programming couldn't. One of the areas that I love is anything that uses vision, because computer, like go back to that example of the if-then statement, having human beings sit there and writing if-then statements with something they have to look at with all the pixels and all the information is enormously difficult. And if you think about it, very few vision systems out there have done a remarkable job on that. The best have been the stuff that that Adrian and others worked on with OpenCV and the DARPA and self-driving car initiatives. But it's been fallow. So think about everything out there in the world where vision is core to doing the job. Maybe it's something in a kitchen. Maybe it's reffing a game at soccer. Maybe it's just that there's literally so many things out there that we do as tasks, or we take actions that we take that require vision. And apply your thinking where you now can see something, and then keep the action really narrow. So one of the reasons I like self-driving cars, other than the fact that it's extraordinarily dangerous if you get it wrong, is that there's only so many actions you can take. I look, and I can go faster, slower, I can make a left, I can make a right. So think about all those actions out there in each industry, but I like to use this lens of vision, something that literally you would not have been able to sit there and write all of the code for, that the actual algorithm can figure out what it's seeing and take an action.
So, I mean, to take that one point forward, how many people in this room believe that natural language using deep learning is a solved problem? Good. How many people believe that vision is a somewhat solved problem, where if you can think it, the computer can be, the deep learning can be architected to solve it?
I know.
So,
That,
So the question was, how many people think that vision is computer vision is a solved problem?
yes.
And do you think it's a solved problem?
I think that a computer can look at something now and using CNNs with trained data can comprehend essentially, not knowledge, but comprehend what it sees and then take an action based on it. And you can do it in a number of areas. You just need, as people talked about, the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, well, by that metric, though, natural language processing is a solved problem.
Generalized?
Right?
No, it doesn't.
You could take all sorts of sentences and teach computers all sorts of sentences, a huge vocabulary, and have them take action on recognizing those sentences.
Such as?
Within a
You know,
domain.
IVRs, right? Say one if you want the, say two if you want, right? I mean, that's a primitive example.
I think there's an
but
inflection
there's
point,
an-
though. I think there's an
Okay.
inflection point with technology, and I don't have data to back this up, and just the feeling of what I've seen out there. And
Yeah.
in language, I don't feel like it's hit the inflection point. I think it'll get there.
Well,
but
because we're so much more sensitive to the errors in language, we have very little experience with errors in machine vision.
No, I disagree. I think I've seen these algorithms in work. The vision system will tell you if it's a cat sitting on top of a turtle. In
Yeah.
my voice recognition, so I mean, if we really pare it down, voice recognition, Google does good on my accent, Siri not so much.
Yeah.
Voice recognition is getting much further along.
Yeah.
But when it comes to NLU understanding what I am asking for,
Yeah.
within within a very narrow domain, yeah, works reasonably well.
So do you remember?
Completely
I agree with
Yeah.
that, but I'm just saying, to
remember
suggest
when-
that in vision we've solved that
Well,
problem.
but it's like an order, so I don't know if you remember when Manjal started Raya, which became like.com and so forth, but his first product was where you tag like photos, and my wife probably went through like 5,000 of our photos tagging faces in it.
Right.
And at the end of it, it still was not good. When Google, a couple of years ago in Google I/O, when they first launched the sort of auto tagging, and all of a sudden I find a picture of my son for all of the years down to a baby.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. It is order of magnitude better. And one of the other reasons
Yeah.
why I got excited by the space
Yeah.
was I was with a guy who had spent his life in deep learning. I pulled him out to come work at my company because he had abandoned AI. And then the Google I/O conference comes and he goes, holy cow, like, this is not, we've been at a 1% improvement, and all of a sudden this is it. This is the whole reason I went to my PhD to do this. So I think envision systems were there, but I have not seen anyone who's that excited about the language
The voice
systems
systems.
yet. Yeah.
But the reason I'm bringing
What
it
do you
up
guys
is,
think?
well,
I think that the biggest problem is that statistical method like deep learning and machine learning. This is math. Our language is symbolic, it's not math. I think we're getting
True.
into this rabbit hole by West Coast thinking in AI that let's give more data, more tags
true.
we figure out. It takes 8 years for Google to create parsing with parse space. Thousands of people, hundreds of
Yeah.
dollars. And it just
That's a really good distinction right there.
Okay,
is
go ahead and
that-
repeat the comment.
Yeah,
Yes, CNNs are really just like probability of statistics. They don't actually get there's a cat in the picture or not. But this friend of mine actually said, we're probably actually going to steer everyone away from true knowledge because he gave this example of a picture of the back of a dog that a system thinks is a cat, but when a human looks at it, they see a leash. And as a human, you go, wait a minute, a leash wouldn't be on a cat, it would be on a dog. That's the difference between like understanding and statistically probable dog versus cat. And so,
Bingo,
so
right?
language definitely falls more into that understanding, and that's the point you made, which is a great point.
It's just more, well.
I don't know.
yes,
Let's just keep throwing.
Argue it.
Let's keep throwing
Okay,
processing
so,
at it.
yeah, right.
If anybody can solve NLU, please contact me first. All I'm saying. Call me first when NLU is solved.
Yeah, okay.
Now that I've solved it,
Yeah.
let's look at who spent the most money in the world on this problem. It started with DAML, Dark Agent Markup Language, in the semantic world. And what the intelligence community does is they tie ontologies to these other technologies so they get context.
Yeah.
And so that's what's missing from NLP. It's a world that I've worked in the past, right, but not now. But that's what I submit. If you follow the billions of dollars that have been spent on these people, they learn, and I'll just give you one example, they learned they couldn't connect the databases of the 26 intelligence community three-letter acronyms. So what they did is they created a semantic index of all the data, right? And that's how they solved the understanding problem. I'm not saying that it applies here, but DAML was created, and now OWL, which is where it ultimately went to, is used so that the IC can semantically understand the social sphere, right, at Twitter, Firepost pace. And so I'm not saying it's a panacea.
So, okay, right, I mean, so, but what you're saying is that language is just a much more complex level problem than identifying objects in an image. But, you know, sort of, yes, agree. But if you want to predict, I don't know.
Well, there's kind of two pieces to NLP too sometimes. Well, not always, but there's like transcription of hearing and converting what you're saying into the words, and then there's understanding what those words are.
That's why I use
And
NLU.
I think actually transcription is going to get there pretty soon. I think we're actually not too far from true transcription being better than humans.
And you can certainly train transcription systems.
Right. I think it's the latter one that we're all kind of saying, what's the solution here?
So I'm okay. I agree then.
Okay. You know what? Let's open us up to questions here in a minute. But keep in mind, if you're tweeting tonight, it's hashtag the Deep Learning Group, also hashtag Royse University, and I'm sure you have it's at TDLG is the Twitter handle. So, do we have some questions from the audience? And by question, I mean if you ever saw Jeopardy, okay, it's got to end in a question mark. Any questions as opposed to comments? Right here.
Yeah, my interest is around the fact that Facebook, Google, and now Baidu have basically open sourced an enormous code base. And so, you know, from an investment perspective, how does that change your mindset since, you know, now we've got an army of people developing to different verticals that are somewhat semi-proprietary, you know? I mean, so how does that affect your mindset? And knowing that there's been a huge investment, like Clarify got a lot of money, and now they're pretty much disintermediated. I mean, so that's my question.
Do you want to repeat the question, Roger?
I'm not sure you even understand the question. So I guess what you're saying is that because of what the big companies have done, they've created a much more difficult competitive landscape because of the proprietary aspect of some of the things that they've done, advances in this area. Is that what you're saying? And how do you compete with that?
Do people feel that way? Do people actually feel that way?
Just the opposite.
I got the sense it was almost the other way with some of these frameworks. I thought they were awesome and people were excited by them. And the biggest challenge sometimes with frameworks is getting enough people to actually use them so you all start to build up the knowledge base and the code samples and all those pieces. But maybe I'm missing. Is there a concerned conspiracy sort of where they're going to close off pieces of it, sort of Oracle Java style? Wait, don't we like TensorFlow and don't we like those things? Do we not like those?
So you're saying, but I think the way I thought I heard the question was there are a whole bunch of startup companies that started up as these platform technologies.
Oh, I see.
that would be platforms for developing solutions on top of. And now with all this new open source stuff, the platform guys are kind of screwed because I can get all the way there pretty easily, right? That's what
Is that it?
Okay, right. Yeah, so don't invest in platforms technology.
Okay, well, that's easy.
If you're a platform technology company,
Question over here.
go after a niche.
My perspective on that is algorithms are one thing, but they need to be applied on the right kind of data pipeline and for it to solve the real problem. So the question would be, how do you evaluate whether someone has the right kind of data pipelines feeding to solve a particular problem?
How do you evaluate whether somebody has the,
Data feeding into the right open source algorithms, but you still need the right
Data.
But yeah,
data.
Yeah.
but I think your point is correct in that, like, the people who competed with, Microsoft, BASIC and Microsoft programming languages, C++, struggled to build their own competitors to that. And that is certainly possible to happen again. I guess the question is just, the flip side though is that they also made it possible because now there were all these customers. They actually got the developers all these customers. Whereas I don't know if the small guys building frameworks were getting enough customers for developers to make it worth it. So I don't know if they were offering enough value.
Yeah, but the small guys were also, most developers, how many of you use for image processing Cafe or Theano? There's a handful of libraries I hear everybody uses. Like if we raise our hands, who uses a proprietary deep learning framework?
You probably built your own, didn't you?
You built your own. Is that true? You're a CS PhD who built his own deep learning framework, right?
I'm not actually a PhD, but
Close.
I think it's if you're going to open a pizza restaurant, you're not supposed to buy some frozen pizza from Costco.
Right, and have them cook it.
That's true. I wish a lot of pizza restaurants did make their own pizza.
Interesting. But yeah, the data point. It happens to be another medical example, but this extraordinarily interesting, bioinformatics company that's doing, and there are a few of them doing this, and there's one of them out of Stanford as well. What they're trying to do is diagnose infections by doing the gene sequencing of the microbes, right? And so, so the world has been collecting this data on microbe genomes, for almost 16 years now, right? So you've got these genomes that are collected in thousands of databases in different research labs and universities and clinics and CDCs around the world. And so their challenge is curating and scrubbing all of these different databases which have all of these different microbe genomes in them. And so it's a huge amount of effort that only somebody who's very expert in the field can do. You can't open source it to Google, right, or whatever, or to Mechanical Turk or whatever. So, so yes, your data is potentially more important as a source of competitive advantage than your algorithms. Fact,
Bill, do you look at that when you're making an investment? Is it an investment in the data, or is it an investment in this technology, which sounds like there's a lot of risk there, because it could be an open source issue, it could be obsolete very soon, it could be replaced by something better. Is the data really important to you?
Well, in this case, because the data is cumulative and it's permanent, it's not like log file data. It's genome data, right? And that has persistence, and it gets better over time. So yes, the unfair advantage of having unique access to a curated data pool that they've got, sort of a 6-year head start on, that's an interesting advantage. That's not the only criterion. Yeah. I don't care that much about the algorithm they use. I want to know that somebody says it works, but I don't care which algorithm it is as long as it works. And then I want to know that at the back end, they have a solution that has a very high probability of being accurate, a higher probability of being accurate than all the alternatives by some significant amount, because it's got to be a significant improvement.
Yeah,
to
Venu,
get
you look like you disagreed with that. Was there?
No, personally, I think, access to data or better algorithms, I think these are all fleeting kind of advantages. Maybe somebody gets a 6-month head start because they got curated data from source A, but for all you know, there may be a source B that probably provides a similar information or whatever, unless it is so proprietary, like, weather data or some other data where, one entity has pretty much most control over that kind of data for a particular region. So, it's, to me, it's like, what makes a successful company is not just the data or the algorithm. I mean, there are so many things that go into it. So for me to kind of say or agree that, data is the advantage or the algorithm is the advantage would be very difficult for me to agree to that
Yeah, okay.
assertion.
This guy over here is about to pass out. He's had his arm up so long.
I have a question that's somewhat similar. Is there such a thing as intellectual property protection when it comes to deep learning? And if so, what kind of form? Or is it inherently protected because of the data sets?
Come meet our patent lawyer. Where is he?
Counselor?
I think this was,
Go ahead.
I think this was,
We're looking to you to answer this question.
Well,
You're the freaking lawyer.
or there's somebody in IP over there we can go
It's
to.
just the usual stuff, trade secret or patents, if it rises to the level of something that's patentable, just like any other technology. I think the problem you've got here, I think the data, if you gather it and if you keep it secret and you use reasonable measures, all that stuff you do, then certainly it's a protectable trade secret and a pretty valuable one. The problem is if it becomes not secret somehow, which is why you need to see a patent lawyer like Steve to give you protection in case that happens. Okay.
And
Thank you for
I don't
that.
know if when I look at investments, I'm not super sensitive to someone when they say I have a patent pending algorithm. There's just so many algorithms that can come out. It's tough for me to know whether or not the patent provides protection. But what's nice about deep learning is a lot of deep learning also touches hardware. And in hardware, with both sort of the electrical and mechanical side, there I do think the IP is very powerful in the design work and how you combine things. And I also think just generally now with the latest stuff that's happened in the government as far as protection of software versus hardware, there I do kind of perk my ears up a little bit more is on the combination of software, but really with the hardware component to it.
So IP protection is important for hardware, is what you're saying. Much
Yeah,
more than
I don't think it's going to make you win. So it's not really necessarily, unless you're trying to build an IP shop. But I do think that if you're going to invest and you're only doing software, it's a lot tougher to figure out where you're going to get some IP protection. But with hardware, there's unique ways you can combine it that I think is better respected in courts later. But honestly, for small startup, it's really defensive. It really shouldn't be offensive unless that's your whole gig is to do that.
Right. Okay, over here.
So I guess it's a two-part question. How much control over data and revenue has the pre-seed valuation, and any tips on negotiating around these advantages?
How much control over data and
Having revenue.
Well, all investors like companies that have revenue, I think, as long as it's growing rapidly. So that's always going to help your valuation. I mean,
How do you measure them, and how do you know how to approach when you're sitting in front of somebody negotiating the terms? How do you know how much weight to put to it?
I'll start first just because I actually like to invest in the super early stage. So I'm generally not looking for revenue, and it's not important. The problem is when you're at, and I don't mind being at the idea stage, I don't do pure research in the form of something that can take 5 years to come out, and that has more to do with the fact that technology changes too rapidly, so waiting 5 years for you to get your product to the customer just doesn't make sense. You'll get eclipsed by then. But if it's within a reasonable time frame, like a year, there's not really any data points there. It's all, quite honestly, deep down, most investors, it comes down to your gut feel about the person. Will this person be able to make this successful? Are they in a space that I'm personally excited about? It's like dating. It's like the analytics of dating and whether you're going to like marry the person or not. At the early stages, that's quite honestly how I feel about investing. Do you not feel that way about early stage of investing? I mean, there's just no data points, and the data points are somewhat like
but wait. So
yes, go.
I mean, Yes, team is really important. I agree. I totally agree with that. And you adjusted somewhat, but revenue is also important. Not that we, it's really important that you have a focus on revenue. But we frequently invest pre-revenue. But we want to know that's part of the plan, right? But on the it's not in terms of dating. I sympathize with the metaphor, but fundamentally, I guess yeah. I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's going to be objectionable, right? But
let me put it very simply. I don't do C, but this is how typically. It's not a question of negotiation. It's a question of how much money are you raising. Are you raising $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? And there's a certain amount of dilution that everybody expects to go through at that. So in a way, you can't have a $100 million valuation at seed, nor can you have a $2 million valuation or $1 million. So in some senses, you can have all kinds of things, but it really depends upon the dilution and the amount of money you're raising. Take a look at it. Typically in a seed or a Series A, are you going through a 33% dilution, 25% dilution, 20% dilution? And then you can figure out what the valuation is going to be. So there is not much of a rocket science in that place, because there is an information asymmetry, right? You think you know a lot. This side, the investors are sitting. They know you. They know what you're presented. So.
But how many people do discounted cash flows right now when they're making their investment decisions? It's an auction. It's an auction with very few players.
We're back to the dating metaphor, right? So the point of the equivalency here is you rarely fall in love, right? Most human beings rarely fall in love, and yet amazingly, almost every human being has this experience of meeting someone and going, wow. That's amazing, but it's extremely rare, right? And so that's the challenge for an entrepreneur, which is a la dating, you have got to get someone to go, wow, that's incredible. So it's not, that you check off the boxes, he's honest, he has integrity, he's persistent, he has a degree, good solid team, right? It's in the data, it's more than sort of a good judgment. You've got to somehow knock their socks off, and usually it's not the team that knocks their socks off. Usually you've got some combination of a novel technology with a novel attack on the market, with a novel unfair advantage, a partnership or background or connection, and you've got the chemistry that works. But to get to, wow, that's amazing, it's not good enough to be, to have a nice smile and a good sense of humor, not that that's, all you look for.
But some people write $30 million checks to people with a nice smile.
Yeah, they do. Okay, fair point.
Well, let me give you a little bit of why, though. Okay, let me give you a little bit of why. When an investor is talking to you, wants to know whether you're going to solve every problem that lies ahead. Are you going to be able to convince that amazing potential hire to come join you? Are you dynamic in that way that you're going to get somebody to come join, some brilliant, smart person who's going to look at what you're doing and say, that makes no sense. Why should I join that? I'm a super analytical, smart person. Why would I go do something crazy like this? It hasn't succeeded yet. Are you going to be able to get your customer to go write a check to you, even though you have no reference customers yet, and they only stand to lose, right? So there is something to that dynamic personality, and investors do look for that, but not in the way that you may think. As an outsider, you look at it and go, how did that guy get $20 million? His idea is stupid. It might be stupid. It probably is stupid. But the investor looks at this person and goes, but as he hires better people, and as he goes out and talks to the market, and as he goes and finds the next round of funding that's going to get my valuation to now be twice as valuable in the future, that is a good investment for me to make. I'm investing in this person. And it's one of the things that we struggle with in Silicon Valley, because we are surrounded and are often brilliant people who can build amazing things. But oftentimes we forget that while we're hacking away at our code, we're forgetting to sort of do human hacking, to do social hacking, which is how do you actually win the social game, because in the end, you're still trying to convince people to buy your products, you're still trying to convince people to join your companies, and none of that is tech-oriented, and none of that is, I mean, that is just sort of straight-up human, like, convincing people.
Okay, more questions? Okay, right here in front. We'll get you next.
Quick question. So, do you guys believe learning can be learned and creativity can be learned? At the end of the day, was human being created or not? So the reason I'm asking that question is, I personally believe any creative problem, if cannot be solved by algorithm, they cannot be solved by big data, no matter how big it is.
Well, let me rephrase that. Would you invest in a company that was going to learn creativity, human creativity, I think is what you're talking about. Not so much do you believe that science can do that, but would you invest in that? There's your answer.
No, would I invest in something? If it solved a big, if somebody has a technology that creates stuff in such a way that either exploits a huge opportunity or solves a big problem, of course I would invest in it, right? I mean, if you could build a machine that, that could generate...
Makes music.
What? If you
does art.
Well, good jokes, for example,
yeah.
Right? Right? I mean, I think you could probably build a machine that is as good at building good jokes as, Jerry Seinfeld is, right?
So
now, could it deliver the joke? That's the question.
So basically, can learning be learned?
Can learning be learned?
Well, this is back to vision versus language. At some level, of course it can, right? Of course it can. The question is, is there an upper limit to it? And I'm not sure that I have a point of view on whether there's an upper limit to whether learning can be learned. Do you think there is?
I think machines will ultimately be able to be more creative than human beings. I think the biggest thing that actually limits it in a weird way is like the amount of energy it takes to do it, and how much you can contain that down in size. But I do think that eventually machines will be able to invent more and do more than any human being.
Is a machine going to be able to replace me, for example?
Replace you? We have this conversation all the time. VCs.
What is it exactly that you do?
Well, that gets you to the NLU point right there.
Well, let me give you an example.
Start this, Roger.
Let me give you a really good example, because I want to know if a machine will learn to do this, because I've been doing what I do for 30 years, whatever that is. And let's say I got a company walks in, there's 3 founders. And they say, we want to have an agreement, we're going to sell some shares. Well, I happen to know one of the founders. I saw him down at the bar the other night, and I see him at the bar every night, So I kind of know what he's like. And the second founder, he's about my age, but he just hired a secretary, he's about 25, and they look awfully cozy, you know what I mean? So I kind of know what's going to happen there. And the third founder, boy, he's awfully pale, So I kind of know what kind of agreement I'm going to draft for these guys just because of that human sense that I have. Now, is a machine going to learn that one of these guys, we're going to be fighting with an ex-spouse soon. The other guy is going to just disappear, and we're going to have to figure out how to get his shares back. And the third guy is going to have health problems and maybe die, so we better plan for that. Can a machine figure that out?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Then I'm screwed.
Because a machine, unlike a human, would never get exhausted thinking about all the corner cases that it needs to, protect against. So the machine would, of course, protect against all those corner cases, and some you didn't even imagine, right? I mean, for example, but on the creativity side, so there's a company actually. It has a Google provenance, but it's their big idea is they want to put all data scientists out of a job. And so their point is when you're thinking about things like proprietary trading, so in fintech, proprietary trading, right? So in order to come up with a strategy to test, you need a data scientist to sort of think of some warp perhaps in trading processes that you might be able to exploit with a proprietary trading algorithm. So, but you need a data scientist to come up with a hypothesis to test. And so their big idea is, is to program the machines to come up with hypotheses that the data scientists would never even think of, right? So in that sense, it's more creative than a human.
So what's significant is that you as an investor believe that.
Aha, that's an
Right?
interesting point.
And Bessemer, would Bessemer
Okay.
believe
I was
that?
going to take will machines replace lawyers? Yes is the answer. Eventually, is the other part of it. But I think this is an important thing. There are many tasks that we consider to be expert tasks. Reading law documents is one of them. Looking at logs in server systems is another one. Driving used to be another a human task, which is considered an expert task. I think in the next 5 years, so in 20 years, there may be no more lawyers, capital substitution will go across the entire workforce. But in the next 5 years, there's a distinct opportunity to allow an individual lawyer to process 1,000 documents where they only used to be able to process 10, right? These are the baby steps. So is NLP strong enough right now in a constrained enough domain to allow a lawyer to be able to find certain terms in a large corpus of documents? Yes, of course. You can read one document at a time, but you can tell the machine, I'm thinking about finding anything related to death of one of the founders. Find it in all the documents, and the machine can literally do that across every document. So it's about how can a machine accelerate a human by doing what we currently consider as expert tasks. Vision is a great one. I met this company in Canada where they're putting cameras on top of some heavy machinery in quarries to look for the sizes of rocks being picked up. Now, a human can simply not go stand in front of a caterpillar and say, 7 inches, 9, you just can't do it.
Yeah.
But machines can.
That's cool.
And so literally they're like, because we do this, we can actually predict maintenance windows on that machine.
That's cool.
On the teeth of this very expensive quarry digging thing, I don't remember the name. So people will be replaced, but it's going to be completely different, right? Don't look at just what we can do now. Where can a sensor come in and keep looking at stuff?
But the reason I like that one also is it's fairly absolute. Like, it will break the machine or it won't break the machine. If you look around at what you're all wearing, look around at what everyone's wearing. Which one of you is wearing the right outfit? Which one? Wow. There you go. There you go. Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's how you choose a VC.
But if you think about it, like, there are lots of problems people may think we need to solve, like what clothes you should wear. But these are almost like abstract sort of social problems we've generated for ourselves. They're not like the machine's breaking or not breaking because of that boulder's going to break it or not break it. So you have to make a decision about whether these problems, you want to solve these problems. Someone may still want you to solve them, or whether they go away in the future. Like, some of these are questionable as to whether or not, we decide we want to solve them or not. But there are so many problems out there, agriculture, industry, medicine, where, like, if you can actually detect cancer before it happens and you can stop it, like, there's a absolute yes or no of it happening.
Actually, we've invested in a company which is sending drones out across the farms to look at using all types of proprietary sensors to see the moisture levels and the acidity levels and so on and so forth. Because with enough data collected, they can reduce the water usage of a farm. Very simple problem.
It's way beyond that now. Not only reduce it, they tell the farmer when to water.
And yet, an application that knows exactly where to put the animated kitty cat ears on a girl's head is wildly more successful than...
For sure.
There you go, folks. You're looking for a new company. Last question, or somebody up here. Okay, yeah, go ahead. What?
I do spend a lot of time in self-driving. We can have a conversation when I step out.
Okay. Any closing words of wisdom for our group? And I know our panel is going to stick around and talk to our group here, but any last words that you'd like to say?
The one thing I just hope is that people don't look at deep learning like that hammer that is everything looks like a nail, because I think that's one thing that's a danger that few years back, whenever you looked at an investment pitch, you had the word big data in there. Then it became machine learning had to be included in every investment pitch. And I just hope deep learning also doesn't become like that. Although I would love to see deep learning everywhere, but I just hope it's not one of those things that everybody uses it because they need to.
Yeah, and my concern is that that exactly is what is happening, and everybody's throwing AI into everything. And it's being exacerbated by the investor side of the community as well. And every investor on the planet wants to be on this wave, this curve, this tsunami that seems to be deep learning AI. And so I worry that what's going to happen is you're going to get this flood of startups that grab some component of deep learning and jump into the market, and that will crowd out some of these companies that we may not see through all this noise. So please, if you're going to jump into this pool, if you're going to jump into the deep learning end of the pool, please do something important and meaningful and unique.
All right.
You should absolutely jump into this pool. It is going to be everything over the next 10 years. It is what, if you were making the decision in the 70s to go into PC industry, or the 94, 93 into the web and internet, it's the decision you're making. It is early. There are a lot of things going kind of nuts right now. But I do not see this trend changing, and over the next 10 years, if you want to be at the forefront and the leaders in this industry, you have to start now.
Vision, voice, NLU someday in the next few years, our fundamental approach to how we interact with computers is going to be different in a decade. Absolutely different, and it'll all be powered by some deep learning in the back. But nobody thinks about deep learning when they're using Siri or when they're using Echo, but that's what it is. So it's going to fundamentally change how we interact with computers and how the computers interact with everything behind them. So completely agree.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our panel. Thank you to our audience for being here. Enjoyed it.
All right, well, thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for coming. This has been a wonderful event. Please spend a little bit of time. You don't have to go home immediately. Introduce yourself to the people next to you, hang out, have fun, and get to know folks. All right, thank you very much, everyone.
As long as you send the selfie later.
Okay, I'll come out.
Oh,
Mr. Roger.
Hi.
I'm Jane.
Hi.
Do you have a car by any chance?
One card.
Oh, great.
The last card.
Oh.
I mean, it's one of these things.